They laughed at the veteran digging a giant hole with only his dog by his side. Until the storm hit, the power died, and his shelter became the only warm place left on the mountain. When the worst winter in decades slammed into Pine Hollow Ridge, the townspeople finally understood why Caleb Hunter and his loyal dog Rocco spent months building an underground shelter everyone mocked. As their homes froze and the firewood rotted, his stayed bone-dry, burning hot enough to save an entire town. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? The first swing of the pickaxe cracked through the frozen soil like a rifle shot against the quiet of Pine Hollow Ridge. Frost leapt from the ground in tiny white sparks, drifting into the cold morning air before settling on Caleb Hunter's coat. He paused only long enough to catch his breath, steam breaking from his lips like smoke from an old engine. Then he raised the pick again. Rocco stood a few feet away, paws planted firmly in the snow, ears sharpened toward the sound. The German shepherd didn't flinch. He knew this rhythm, steel striking ice, ground shuddering beneath them, the steady breath of the man he had followed through storms far worse than this quiet Montana morning. But the neighbors didn't understand. From the road, two men in puffy jackets slowed their morning walk just to stare. One of them snorted out a laugh. "There he goes again," the taller one murmured. "Groundhog Man's back at it." The other shook his head. "What kind of man digs a crater in January? Guy's got screws loose." Caleb heard them. He always did, even when he pretended otherwise. He didn't look up, didn't stop digging, didn't offer a single word in his defense. He simply drove the pickaxe into the frozen earth again with a grunt, the muscles across his back tightening beneath his faded flannel. Rocco's gaze flicked toward the men on the road, one short, assessing stare that made them stop laughing. The taller one muttered something under his breath and hurried along. Caleb exhaled, long and steady. "Easy, boy," he murmured. "Not worth the bark." But something behind the words trembled. That tremble wasn't fear. It was memory, old and sharp as broken ice. The ground was stubborn this time of year. Pine Hollow didn't thaw until late spring, and yet he was out here, carving into the earth like a man racing a clock only he could hear. Caleb jammed the shovel into the soil pile beside the widening pit. It was already taller than his waist, a jagged mound of frozen dirt and pale stones. Every swing, every lift, every breath was deliberate. Every motion pulled him further from the memory he didn't want but could never outrun. 8 years earlier, he had dug in snow like this too, except he hadn't been building something then. He had been searching, desperately, his hands blistered, his lungs burning in the thin Afghan air while the wind screamed around him. His teammate, Lewis, was buried under the collapse of an old structure, a shelter that was supposed to save them, not crush beneath a surprise winter slide. Caleb had dug until his fingers tore through his gloves, until they found Lewis's hand. Cold. Too cold. No amount of firewood in the world could bring him back. Caleb blinked, the memory drifting away like fog, and he forced himself into the present. The hole needed to be deeper. Deeper meant warmer. Deeper meant safer. Deeper meant no one under his roof would ever face the cold the way Lewis had. Rocco stepped closer, pressing against Caleb's leg for a heartbeat, before returning to his watch. The dog always knew. When Caleb's mind slipped into places he didn't want it to go, Rocco pulled him back without a word. The scrape of tires on gravel pulled both of their attention toward the driveway. A maroon SUV rolled in and stopped beside the mailbox, the passenger window sliding down just enough for a woman's voice to carry. "Caleb, you building a mine out here?" she asked with a tight smirk. Janet Miller, the kind of neighbor who talked sweet in person but let bitterness drip in every direction the moment backs were turned. "No mine," Caleb replied, wiping sweat from his brow despite the freezing air. "Then what is it?" she asked. "Some sort of bunker? People are starting to wonder." People. There it was again. The whispers like a current he could feel but never see. He straightened his spine. Just winter prep. Janet's laugh was thin and sharp. Winter prep? Caleb, you're digging halfway to Canada. Before he could answer, Rocco stepped forward, a low rumble lifting from deep in his chest. Not aggressive, alert, protective. Janet's smirk vanished. She rolled up her window and drove off without another word. Caleb looked down at the dog. You didn't have to scare her off. Rocco nudged his hand firmly, as if disagreeing. Caleb sighed, picked up the shovel, and returned to work. The wind cut across the ridge, sweeping loose flakes into the pit. He studied the depth. Should be 7 feet now. Another 3, maybe 4, before he could start shoring the walls. It would be an underground shelter like none Pine Hollow Ridge had ever seen. Thermal regulated, gravity vented, fire resistant, and stocked with the one thing desperately needed for a real winter: dry, seasoned firewood. Not damp cords stacked under plastic tarps like the neighbors had. Not pellets. Not gas-powered generators that froze when temperatures tanked. Number. He needed something that didn't fail. Something that didn't die. Something that didn't collapse under pressure the way the Afghan shelter had. Another truck slowed on the street. This one didn't stop, but someone shouted from the driver's window, "Hey, Groundhog Man, find any treasure down there?" Laughter trailed behind as the truck sped up. Rocco barked once, loud enough to echo down the ridge, tail stiff, ears pinned forward. "Leave it," Caleb muttered, though he appreciated the sentiment. The insults didn't hurt. Not exactly. They just settled into him. Somewhere between the old scars and the new aches. Pine Hollow Ridge had never accepted him fully. Not since he came back with eyes that scanned shadows too quickly and hands that twitched awake at noises no one else heard. He didn't blame them. People fear what they don't understand. But Rocco understood everything. By mid-afternoon, clouds had rolled in over the mountains, gray and wide like bruises. A storm was brewing. Caleb leaned on his shovel and surveyed his work. Raw earth forming the skeleton of something that mattered. Something he could control in a world that often spun beyond his reach. He climbed out of the pit, joints aching, and Rocco followed close enough that their steps almost matched. "Tomorrow we dig again," Caleb said, rubbing the dog's head. "We get it done, boy, no matter what they think." Rocco pressed his forehead to Caleb's thigh, a gesture of solidarity. Wind swept across the ridge, carrying faint voices of neighbors laughing somewhere in the distance. Caleb ignored them. Let them call him Groundhog Man. Let them joke. He wasn't building this shelter for them. He was building it because once, on a frozen night far away, he had failed someone who depended on him. And he would not fail again. Not here. Not ever. Rocco's ears lifted suddenly, catching a distant sound the human ear couldn't make sense of yet. The dog stared out toward the mountains, muscles tightening. Caleb followed his gaze, a faint shiver crawling up his spine. Something was coming. He could feel it. And Rocco always sensed it first. "Easy, boy," Caleb whispered. But the words didn't comfort him the way they usually did. The air felt wrong. The ridge felt different. Winter had teeth this year, and Pine Hollow Ridge didn't know how sharp they would be. Caleb turned back toward the open pit, jaw tightening. He dug because he had to. He dug because no one else would. And one day soon, the people who mocked him would understand exactly why. The next morning broke cold and pale over Pine Hollow Ridge, the kind of morning where breath felt heavier than the body carrying it. Caleb stood at the edge of the pit, steam rising from his coffee as he surveyed his work from the night before. The hole was deep now, deep enough that shadows clung to the walls long after sunrise. Rocco paced the perimeter with slow, measured steps, sniffing the air as if cataloging every scent of frost and pine. Today, Caleb wasn't digging. Today, he was building. He set his coffee on the tailgate of his truck and unrolled a large sheet of blue paper across the metal. Pencil marks, ruler straight lines, and a dozen hand-scribbled notes ran across it. A design only someone who'd spent years improvising safe spaces in dangerous places could conceive. A thermal-regulated underground shelter. A natural airflow vent system built on gravity and pressure differential. Storage racks placed with military precision to keep firewood bone dry. A reinforced roof that could shoulder 10 feet of mountain snow. Rocco hopped onto the tailgate beside him, nose brushing the edge of the blueprint. Caleb smiled at the dog's curiosity and tapped the corner with a glove. "This is where you'll sleep if the world goes sideways again," he murmured. "Warm, safe, no surprises." The memory he didn't want flickered. Lewis's frozen hand, the sound of wind howling through broken boards, snow piling faster than he could dig. Caleb forced a breath, grounding himself in the present. He ran a hand through Rocco's fur, letting the dog's warmth steady him. The rumble of a car approached on the gravel road. A black SUV rolled to a stop in front of his property. The door opened, and out stepped Tom Reynolds, the self-appointed gatekeeper of Pine Hollow Ridge. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a sharp jaw and sharper voice, Tom always carried himself like a man auditioning for a leadership role no one offered. He marched straight toward Caleb with the determination of someone who believes the world owes him answers. "Morning," Caleb said, keeping his tone neutral. Tom didn't return the greeting. His eyes darted straight to the blueprint. "What is all this?" he demanded. "The neighborhood's been talking. They want answers, Caleb." Rocco lowered his head, ears forward, positioning himself between the two men. "It's nothing harmful," Caleb replied. "Just planning ahead." "Planning ahead?" Tom scoffed. "You've torn up half your yard. You've got machinery back here. Dirt mounds bigger than my truck. People think you're building some kind of bunker or prepping for the end of the world." Caleb folded the blueprint calmly. "Winter prep." "You keep saying that," Tom snapped. "But that isn't winter prep. Winter prep is cleaning gutters and salting your driveway, not whatever this is." He gestured dramatically to the pit. Caleb kept his voice even, controlled, the same tone he used back in the service when panic wasn't an option. "I'm making a shelter," he explained. "A safe space. Dry firewood, backup heat, airflow that won't fail if the power dies." He hesitated, then added quietly, "A place where no one has to freeze." Tom's expression twisted, not in sympathy, irritation. "Well, I don't care what it is, or what. You didn't submit plans to the HOA. There are codes, regulations, and you're violating half of them." Caleb swallowed the frustration rising inside him. His fingers brushed the scar on his forearm where shrapnel once lodged, a reminder of a different kind of battle. "I checked state guidelines," he said. "Underground structures used for storage or emergency shelter fall under individual property rights. No approval needed." Tom stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're making the neighborhood look bad, Caleb. People are worried. They're calling it an eyesore." Rocco growled. Not loud, but unmistakable. Tom flinched. "Call your dog off," he said sharply. "He's fine," Caleb replied. "He just senses tension." "Well, he's not the only one sensing it," Tom snapped. "If you don't fill that hole in by next week, I'll have no choice but to take this to the board." Caleb stared at him for a long moment. He saw the way Tom's breath shook slightly from the cold, the way his jacket collar was zipped too high. The man wasn't here out of true concern. He was here to maintain control. "Do what you have to do," Caleb said quietly. Tom blinked, thrown off by the lack of resistance. Before he could reply, a distant hammering sound echoed across the ridge. The contractor Caleb had hired arrived and started unloading framing materials. Tom watched the activity with a sour expression. "This isn't over," he warned, then turned sharply on his heel and walked back to his SUV. Rocco watched him leave, tail stiff. When the car disappeared down the road, Caleb let out a slow breath. "They don't get it," he murmured. "Not yet." He returned to the blueprint, smoothing the paper again. His hands steadied, his mind narrowed into that quiet place where purpose drowned out doubt. He reviewed vent locations, drainage calculations, and roof bracing angles with the practiced focus of a man who had spent years building field shelters under fire. He didn't build out of paranoia. He built because he knew what failed systems could do. He built because Pine Hollow Ridge wasn't prepared for the kind of storm that took Lewis's life, and storms like that came without warning. Behind him, the contractor, Mike Turner, approached. He was a big man with a kind face, cheeks reddened by cold. "You sure you want to do all this underground?" Mike asked. "Most folks just use prefab sheds." "Most folks haven't seen what I've seen," Caleb replied. Mike studied the blueprint, eyebrows rising. "Ventilation systems, impressive," he admitted. "Never seen one designed like this." "Gravity and temperature differential," Caleb explained. "No power needed. No mechanical parts to fail." "Smart," Mike said. "Real smart." Rocco barked once as if to second the compliment. By late afternoon, the first beams were lowered into the pit. Snowflakes drifted again from a sky that had grown darker, not heavy enough for a storm, but enough to sting the air with warning. Caleb stood on the ridge above the pit, Rocco by his side, the two of them watching the frame take shape. Mike shouted up, "If weather holds, we'll get the roof section in by tomorrow." Caleb nodded. "Appreciate it." But his eyes weren't on the beams. They were on the distant mountains, where clouds were gathering in unnatural lines, long and thin like scars across the sky. Rocco stared the same direction, ears forward, body rigid. Caleb knelt and rested a hand on the dog's shoulders. "You feel it too, don't you, boy?" Rocco didn't move, didn't blink. Something was shifting in the air, something cold, something heavy, and Pine Hollow Ridge had no idea what was coming. Caleb stood and looked back at the half-built shelter, its frame rising from the earth like a promise. "They'll understand," he said softly. "One day soon." Rocco nudged his hand. Together, they turned toward the fading light, the unfinished shelter behind them waiting, quiet, patient, necessary. By the next morning, winter had settled into Pine Hollow Ridge like an old, unwelcome guest. Frost crawled across every window pane. The air held a strange stillness, the kind that made even the birds go silent. Caleb stepped out onto the back porch with a cup of coffee warming his hands. He breathed in the sharp air, then glanced down the ridge toward the mountains. Rocco was already outside, paws planted on the crust of frozen snow, tail stiff, staring into the timberline as if listening for something only he could hear. "Morning, boy," Caleb called softly. Rocco didn't move, didn't look back. His ears stayed locked forward, muscles tight. Caleb felt a pinch in his chest. Not fear, recognition. He knew that stance. It was the same posture Rocco used overseas when he sensed incoming danger long before any human did. A sound, a vibration, a shift in the wind, whatever it was, the dog always knew first. Caleb descended the steps, the crunch of snow under his boots startlingly loud in the quiet yard. He knelt beside Rocco. "What is it?" he whispered. The dog's breath puffed out in fast, shallow clouds. Rocco let out a low rumble, not a growl, more like a warning trapped in his throat. Caleb followed his gaze to the distant peaks. The mountains were wrapped in a strange band of clouds, thin, horizontal streaks, stretching like pale scars across the sky. He hadn't seen cloud formations like that in years. His heartbeat quickened. "Jet stream shift," he murmured. "Can't be. This early." Rocco took one step forward and barked, a single sharp sound that echoed off the ridgeline and bounced back to them, swallowed by the cold. Before Caleb could think more about it, a voice called from the side of the house. "You building an ark out here now, Caleb?" It was Ron Jenkins, one of the more talkative neighbors. A big man with a red beard and an even redder nose from the cold, Ron held a thermos in one hand and waved with the other as he walked closer. Caleb stood up. "Just finishing the shelter." Ron chuckled. "Everyone's buzzing about that thing. Tom came by last night ranting that you were digging tunnels to Canada." Caleb forced a thin smile. "Sounds like Tom." Ron took a sip from his thermos. "You sure you're not overdoing it? Weather guys say it'll be a mild winter. Maybe a cold snap or two, but nothing crazy." Rocco barked once at Ron. Short, urgent, like he wanted him gone. Ron held up both hands. "Easy there, buddy." "He's fine," Caleb said, though he was studying Rocco now. The dog's hackles were up. His tail stayed rigid. His body trembled with something Caleb hadn't seen in a long time. Fear. Not for himself, for Caleb. Ron shrugged. "Well, mild winter or not, you'll have the safest stash of firewood in the county." He chuckled again, oblivious. "Just don't let Tom drag you into court. Man's on a warpath over your hole." Rocco barked sharply, interrupting him. Caleb stepped closer to the dog, lowering his voice. "What is it, boy?" Rocco moved toward the edge of the yard, nose to the wind. He sniffed deeply, then let out a sound Caleb rarely heard from him. A high-pitched whine, followed by a soft, almost panicked yelp. Ron blinked. "Is he sick?" "No," Caleb said slowly. "He's warning me." Of what, he didn't know yet. But Rocco wasn't wrong. Not about things like this. A sudden gust tore across the ridge, flinging tiny shards of ice into their faces. Caleb shielded his eyes. Ron zipped up his coat. "Whoa," Ron muttered. "Didn't see that coming." Caleb stared at the sky. Those thin streaks of clouds were thickening, stacking into layers. The pressure in the air felt strange, heavier somehow, the way it felt before desert storms hit overseas, when the world seemed to hold its breath. "Storm's shifting," Caleb murmured. "Something big out there." Ron laughed nervously. "Weather Service says otherwise." Caleb didn't trust the weather service. He trusted the dog standing beside him. Then Rocco barked again, louder, more urgent, before running to the half-built shelter. He circled the opening, tail whipping through the air. He looked back at Caleb, barking again, insistent. "He wants you to follow him," Ron said. "I know," Caleb replied. Caleb jogged toward the pit, boots slipping in the snow. Rocco stood at the edge of the unfinished walls, barking into the depth as if warning that time was running short. The dog pawed at the edge, then looked down at the structure, then back at Caleb. "He wants it finished," Caleb whispered. Ron blinked. "You're saying your dog knows the weather?" "I'm saying he's never wrong." Rocco let out another bark, the kind that set Caleb's nerves on edge, sharp as a snapped wire. And then the sky growled. A deep, rolling thunder. Not the warm summer type, but a cold, metallic rumble that made Caleb's skin tighten. Thunder in winter at this temperature didn't make sense. Not unless... He whipped his head toward the horizon. Clouds were spilling down the mountain now, tumbling like an avalanche of gray. "No," he whispered. "Not this early." Rocco pressed his body into Caleb's leg, trembling harder. Ron stared at the sky, stunned. "What in the world is that?" "Trouble," Caleb said quietly. He could feel it. The shift, the warning. The same air pressure drop he'd felt the night he lost Lewis. The same eerie silence before the storm's teeth sank into the world. He swallowed hard, forcing the memory back. He wasn't in Afghanistan. He wasn't trapped under a frozen shelter. He wasn't losing anyone this time. He knelt and placed a steady hand on Rocco's back. "All right, boy," he whispered. "I hear you. We don't have much time." The dog leaned into him, eyes wide but resolute. Ron backed away slowly, voice trembling. "Maybe Tom was right. Maybe you really are building a bunker." Caleb stood, his breath steadying. "No," he said. "I'm building a lifeboat, and Pine Hollow Ridge is about to need one." Behind him, the half-finished shelter sat in the snow, waiting. Ahead of him, clouds marched down the mountain like an army. Beside him, Rocco barked again. 3 sharp, urgent notes that pierced the cold morning air. The storm was coming, and whatever it carried, Caleb knew one thing for certain. This time, he would be ready. But readiness was a strange thing. It didn't silence the past. It didn't erase the moments burned into muscle memory, or the faces that lived behind the eyelids. It only gave a man something to hold on to when the dark came clawing again. That night, the dark came early. The sky over Pine Hollow Ridge turned the color of steel, and the cold pressed in like an unwelcome hand on the back of the neck. Caleb finished securing the last of the framing boards, the hammer echoing hollow against the wood. Rocco stayed close, pacing, pausing only to lift his head toward the mountain wind. Snowflakes drifted sideways. Thin, sharp, almost metallic. Something about the air felt hollow. Caleb locked up his tools, gave the shelter one last look, and headed inside. The house was warm, but the warmth didn't settle into him. It rode the edges of his skin like it wasn't sure it belonged there. He poured a cup of chamomile tea, the only thing that ever quieted his nerves, and sank into his armchair. Rocco curled at his feet, resting his head on Caleb's boot. But even with the quiet room, even with the soft hum of the space heater, the tension didn't leave his shoulders. The dog lifted his head, watching Caleb closely. "I'm fine," Caleb whispered. Rocco didn't believe him. Neither did he. Hours later, after turning out the lights and settling into bed, Caleb lay awake staring at the faint glow from the window. The wind had started its lonely whistle around the eaves, a sound that always reminded him of tents flapping in mountain storms overseas, a sound that carried too many memories. He placed a hand on Rocco's back. The dog slept beside him, warm and steady. Caleb waited for the calm to sink in. It didn't. His eyelids finally drifted shut, and the past opened like a trapdoor. The storm screamed around them, white, furious, blinding. Snow blasted into Caleb's face, stinging like sand. He dug with bare hands, clawing through the collapsing shelter. Screams echoed somewhere under the rubble, muffled by crushing snow. Lewis's voice. The sound tore through the wind like a thread about to snap. "Hunter, I'm here!" Then the sound stopped. Caleb dug harder. Nails split. Skin tore. The world shrank to the size of a frozen grave he tried desperately to reach before it was too late. When his fingers brushed skin, cold, unmoving, he let out a sound he didn't recognize. A howl swallowed by the storm. "No, Lewis, don't do this!" Wind roared. Snow buried them. The cold pressed down like a fist. He wasn't in Montana anymore. He was back there, buried again. Fighting ice, fighting time, fighting himself. He choked on the wind and woke up gasping. The bedroom was dark. The only sound was his ragged breathing. Sweat soaked the sheets beneath him despite the cold. His heart pounded like boots racing on frozen ground. Rocco was already awake. The dog sat upright beside him, chest against Caleb's arm, ears pinned forward. He nudged Caleb's chin with his nose. Firm, grounding, insistent. Caleb pressed his forehead to Rocco's and let out a shaky breath. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm here. I'm okay." Rocco didn't move. He leaned his full weight into Caleb's side, anchoring him. Slowly, the shaking eased. The room came back into focus. The dresser, the half-open curtain letting in the glow of the porch light, the frost creeping along the corners of the window. Caleb rubbed the dog's neck, fingers threading through warm fur. "Didn't think I'd go back there," he murmured. "Not tonight?" Rocco whined softly and licked Caleb's hand. "Yeah," Caleb said. "I know. You always know." He sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, steadying his breath. Outside, the wind shifted pitch, a long, low moan rolling across the ridge. Rocco stiffened at the sound. Caleb stood and walked to the window. Snow danced under the porch light, spiraling in strange, erratic patterns. The clouds were lower now, darker. The air felt tight, like the whole ridge was holding its breath. "Storm's changing shape," he whispered. Rocco hopped off the bed and padded toward him, tail down, body tense. Caleb opened the back door and stepped out onto the porch. The cold slapped his face immediately, sharper than before. He scanned the sky. Those thin streaks of cloud from earlier had thickened into heavy ropes sliding down from the peaks. Something was forming. Something big. And something fast. Rocco pressed against his leg, trembling not from cold, but from instinct. Caleb crouched beside him. "It's okay. It's just the wind." But Rocco didn't believe that. And when Caleb looked into those dark, knowing eyes, he realized he didn't believe it either. Thunder grumbled over the mountains, deep, strange, wrong for winter. Caleb's chest tightened. Not from fear, from certainty. Whatever storm was coming, it wasn't the kind local forecasts could predict. He stood and looked back at the unfinished shelter, skeleton walls rising from the earth, ladders covered in frost, beams waiting for tomorrow's work. "Tomorrow we push harder," he murmured. Rocco nudged his hand again. But this time the dog's touch wasn't grounding. It was pleading. Caleb understood. Tomorrow might not be soon enough. He glanced again at the mountains. The clouds rolled faster. The wind sharpened. And deep in his bones, in the part of him shaped by battlefields and frozen nights, he felt the truth settle like a weight he could not ignore. The ridge was in danger. And just like before, he was the only one who sensed it coming. But this time, he wasn't alone. Rocco whined softly and leaned against his leg. "All right, boy," Caleb whispered. "We face it together." Inside the house, the lights flickered once, just enough to make Caleb stop breathing for a heartbeat. Snow swirled harder, the wind howled again, and on that cold, hollow night, Pine Hollow Ridge slept peacefully, unaware that something monstrous was sliding down the mountain toward them. Silent, relentless, inevitable. Caleb exhaled slowly. He would finish the shelter. He would finish it fast. And when the real cold hit, no one under his roof would face what Lewis faced. Not ever again. By dawn the next morning, Pine Hollow Ridge felt different. Not colder exactly, but sharper, like the air itself had edges. Caleb stepped outside to a sky washed in a strange pale yellow light, muted and unnatural. The kind of light that made shadows stretch longer than they should. Rocco bounded out after him, but stopped abruptly halfway down the steps. His paws froze mid-snow, every muscle in his body locked. Caleb followed his gaze to the horizon. The mountains were hidden behind a sweeping wall of moving white. Clouds so thick they looked like carved marble sliding toward the ridge. And they were moving fast, too fast. He pulled out his phone and opened the weather app. The forecast still promised nothing more than light flurries. "Wrong again," he muttered. As if the sky heard him, a gust of bitter air slammed against the house, rattling the porch rail like unseen hands shaking it. Rocco stood firm, ears flattened, tail stiff, fur rippling in the wind. Caleb descended the steps and crouched beside him. "You feel it too," he whispered. The dog didn't blink. A sudden crunch of snow behind him made Caleb stand. Tom Reynolds trudged up the driveway, wrapped in a heavy coat, face red from the cold. His breath came fast, not from exertion, but from agitation. "Caleb," Tom called out, "have you seen the sky? Something's wrong?" That was the last thing he expected from Tom, the man who dismissed every warning, every sign, every concern. "Storm's shifting," Caleb said simply. "Shifting?" Tom snapped. "This thing is swallowing the mountain. Why didn't anyone say anything? The news didn't—" Caleb cut him off. "The news doesn't know these mountains the way the locals do, and they definitely don't know Rocco." Almost on cue, Rocco barked once, short and urgent. Tom flinched. "That dog gives me the creeps sometimes." "He's trying to warn you," Caleb said. Tom wrapped his arms around himself, shivering. "Look, I didn't come to argue. I came because, well, folks are talking. They're scared. And word is you've been expecting this." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Expecting a polar vortex in November?" Tom hesitated. "More like expecting something. Storm, emergency, whatever you want to call it. People think you know something they don't." Caleb didn't answer. He watched the clouds move, heavy sheets of white cascading down the peaks like a slow avalanche. He whispered, mostly to himself, "Feels like the Arctic's falling on us." Tom followed his gaze and swallowed hard. "So what do we do?" "We prepare," Caleb said, "as much as we can." Tom frowned. "Prepare how? It's too late for that." Rocco barked again, circling the yard, nose pressed to the snow like he was searching for cracks in the earth itself. Caleb pointed to the half-finished shelter. "Help me get that roof frame secured. If the wind hits before we brace it, it won't survive the night." To his astonishment, Tom didn't argue. Within minutes, they were hauling lumber, gripping icy boards with numb fingers. The wind picked up, swirling snow into ghost-like wisps around their boots. Nails bent in the cold, sawdust froze mid-air, but they worked. Even Tom, who normally lifted nothing heavier than an HOA binder, kept pace, face determined. But the storm crept close, too close. The air pressure dropped suddenly, as if the sky had inhaled hard and held the breath. Caleb sensed it instantly. Rocco felt it too. He froze, eyes wide, barking at nothing and everything at once. Tom looked around wildly. "What was that? I felt it in my ears." "Pressure crash," Caleb said. "Means the vortex is right above the upper ridge. It's descending." "Descending?" Tom repeated, voice cracking. "That fast?" "Yes." A deep, distant rumble drifted across the valley, low and hollow, the sound of wind colliding with glaciers far above. Not thunder. Not anything natural, Caleb knew. He glanced at Tom. "We're done for today. Go home. Seal your windows. Stack blankets. Stay warm." Tom hesitated. "What about your shelter? It's not ready." "I know," Caleb admitted, "but it's close enough." He didn't add the rest out loud. Close enough to save lives. Close enough to hold until sunrise. Close enough to do what Lewis never got. Tom pulled his coat tighter. Maybe you were right." Caleb nodded once. "Go on." Tom backed away, nearly slipping on a patch of ice before hurrying down the driveway. Caleb turned to Rocco. "Come on, boy. We're not finished." They descended into the pit to check the newly braced beams. The wind sliced downward, filling the space with icy breath. Rocco whimpered. a sound Caleb rarely heard. "I know," he said gently. "I know it's coming." He placed his gloved hand on the cold concrete. The shelter felt alive beneath his palm, like a sleeping animal preparing to wake and protect the flock. He climbed out, Rocco scrambling behind him. Snow whipped sideways now, stealing color from the world. The ridge vanished behind a white curtain. Caleb forced himself to take the scene in. The unfinished shelter, the storm towering overhead, the empty street where no one yet understood what approached. He whispered, "Tonight." A gust answered him with a scream. "Tonight is the beginning." Rocco pressed against him, trembling but steadfast. Lights flickered inside the neighboring houses. One by one they blinked, dimmed, then steadied again, like the electrical grid was bracing itself for a hit. Caleb stared at the sky. The first true blast of cold struck him then, sharp enough to feel through his coat, through his bones. This wasn't ordinary winter. This was a warning shot. The storm had arrived early, violent, unforgiving, unpredictable, and Pine Hollow Ridge was nowhere near ready. Caleb rested a hand on Rocco's back. "We finished the shelter," he whispered. "We finish it tomorrow, or we won't get another chance." Rocco lifted his head to the sky and barked, not in fear, but in defiance. Snow swirled, clouds crashed against each other, and the ridge trembled under the weight of a winter no one expected. But Caleb expected it, and this time, he would not lose anyone. Not one person under his roof, not one life he could save. Rocco stood tall beside him as the storm roared down the mountain, and together they faced the cold that was finally revealing its true teeth. By late afternoon, Pine Hollow Ridge looked like it had been dipped in glass. Every tree, rooftop, and fence post shimmered under a thin crust of ice. The wind cut sideways, lifting snow into blinding sheets that whipped across the road like white sand. The sky had grown so dark that porch lights flicked on automatically, glowing faintly through the storm like distant lanterns in a world turning gray. Inside his kitchen, Caleb stood over the stove stirring a pot of soup, though he wasn't hungry. His eyes kept drifting to the window. He knew the storm was only warming up. Its real power hadn't hit yet. Rocco lay near the back door, watching every sway of the pine branches, every creak of the roof beams. The dog was restless, tail flicking, ears twitching with every shift in the wind. Caleb's phone buzzed on the counter, an alert from the Montana Weather Service. "Potential grid strain in northern counties. Possible outages," he sighed. "Possible," he repeated under his breath. "That's one word for it." Another gust hit the house, rattling the windows. Rocco stood instantly, letting out a soft warning bark. "It's all right," Caleb told him, though he wasn't sure he believed it. The power flickered once. Just once. Barely a heartbeat. But Caleb froze. Rocco stared at him, sensing Caleb's shift in posture. "I know," Caleb whispered. "It's coming." He set the soup aside and grabbed the flashlight off the counter, checking its batteries with quick, practiced movements. He lit the wood stove, not because he needed it yet, but because habit told him to prepare early. He tossed in 2 pieces of the shelter-dried oak. They caught immediately, burning with a clean blue-orange flame, a flame that would matter soon. He knelt and ran a hand along Rocco's flank. "When the lights go out, stay close." Rocco licked his hand once, then moved toward the front of the house, body tense. The wind howled louder, rattling shutters, whistling between roof shingles, making the house feel like a ship straining against a rising storm. Then it hit. A deafening crack rolled across the ridge, like a cannon firing into the night. A transformer exploding somewhere near the old lumber mill. Rocco barked sharply, fur rising, and then darkness. Every light in the house blinked out. The hum of the heater died. The quiet became absolute. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was thick, heavy, like the entire ridge held its breath. Caleb clicked on the flashlight. "It's all right, boy." But the temperature inside the house was already dropping. Not fast, not yet, but steadily, like the house was exhaling its last bit of warmth. Across the valley, porch lights went black one after another. The whole ridge dimmed until it looked like a forgotten town tucked under a mountain of snow. Caleb moved to the living room window and looked out. The only thing glowing on the entire street was the faint orange flicker from his own stove vent, the fire inside burning steadily, a small island of warmth in an ocean of frozen dark. Rocco pressed against his leg, watching the street with him. "People won't be ready for this," Caleb murmured. As if to prove him right, distant shouts carried through the wind. A generator sputtering somewhere failed to start. A car horn stuck, whining before it died. Someone's dog barked frantically from a porch. Caleb grabbed his coat. "Let's check the shelter." He and Rocco stepped into the storm. The wind clawed at them, freezing their breath mid-air, forcing Caleb to tighten his scarf around his mouth. Snow slapped against his face like coarse salt, but they pushed through. The hatch sat half-buried at the base of the yard. Snow piled around its edges, clinging to the steel like the earth was trying to swallow it. Caleb brushed it clear with his gloves, spun the wheel lock, and pulled. Warm, dry air drifted out. He exhaled, relief threading through his chest. The firewood was safe. The vent system was working. The shelter, unfinished and raw above ground, was fully functional below. Rocco bounded down the ladder first, landing with practiced ease. Caleb followed with the flashlight. The space glowed softly from battery lanterns. Rows of perfectly stacked oak and hickory lined the wall, elevated on metal racks that kept every log off the ground. The air smelled faintly of warm earth and seasoned wood. This room was ready. This room was life. Caleb stood still for a moment, letting the heat wash over him, letting the storm fade behind thick concrete walls. "We'll be all right," he told Rocco. "But the rest of Pine Hollow—" He didn't finish the thought. The dog whined and rested his chin on Caleb's boot, as if urging him to take action. "We'll help them," Caleb promised. "Anyone who comes to this door, we won't turn them away." He climbed back out of the shelter. The wind nearly pushed him off the ladder. He steadied himself and trudged toward the porch with Rocco close behind. Halfway there, motion caught the edge of his flashlight beam. Someone stumbling through the snow. A woman, carrying something bundled in her arms, her hair whipped wildly, her breath coming in panicked bursts. Caleb sprinted toward her. "Hey, over here!" She collapsed against him, sobbing. The bundle shifted, and he saw tiny fingers peeking out. A baby. Freezing. Rocco barked frantically, circling them. "I'm Emma," the woman gasped. "My son, Noah, he won't stop shaking. I didn't know where else to go. The power's out. My house is freezing. Come inside," Caleb said, voice firm but gentle. "Now." He scooped the baby into his arms, pressing the small body against his chest to share whatever warmth he could. Emma staggered after him, crying. Rocco led the way, barking at the door as if demanding it open faster. Inside, Caleb dropped a blanket in front of the stove and set little Noah down. The baby's lips were blue, his breaths short and shallow. Emma fell to her knees. "Please, help him." Caleb grabbed 2 more blankets, wrapped the child tightly, and positioned him near the fire, close enough to warm, far enough to be safe. "Rocco," Caleb said, "keep him warm." The dog curled around the baby, his thick coat trapping heat. Emma stared, tears streaking down her face. "Thank you, thank you." Caleb didn't answer. He was too focused on Noah's breathing. Outside, the storm roared louder, smashing itself against the world. Inside, the fire cracked, warm and steady, and on a night when Pine Hollow Ridge fell into frozen darkness, the first life was saved inside Caleb Hunter's home. It would not be the last. For a long moment, the only sound in the living room was the crackling of the fire and the faint, fragile breaths of baby Noah. Snow hissed against the windows, carried sideways by a wind so fierce it made the shutters tremble. The temperature inside the house was dropping inch by inch, but the stove's steady glow held the cold at bay like a guardian standing firm against the storm. Caleb knelt beside the baby, gently brushing aside the blanket to check his skin tone. Noah still looked pale, too pale, but the blue tint around his lips had begun to fade. Tiny fingers twitched. His breathing deepened. "He's warming up," Caleb murmured. Emma let out a sob, covering her mouth with both hands. "Thank God. I thought—" Her voice broke and she pressed her forehead to the floor in relief. "You did the right thing coming here," Caleb said. "Any later and the cold might have—" He stopped himself before finishing the sentence. No need to paint the horrors she already feared. Rocco nudged Noah gently with his nose, then curled tighter around him, his thick fur trapping the heat Caleb had fought so hard to make. Emma wiped her tears and reached out as if to touch the dog, then hesitated. He's protecting him. He's trained for it," Caleb said. "But more than that, he knows the stakes." As if on cue, Rocco lifted his head toward the window, ears perked sharply. He didn't bark, not yet, but his muscles stiffened, attention narrowing on something outside. Caleb stood and walked slowly to the front window. He wiped away the thin layer of frost inside the glass and peered out. Shapes moved in the dark. Not animals. People. Flashlights bobbed in the storm, beams scattering as they fought through the swirling snow, figures stumbling through the cold. A woman shouting for help, her voice instantly swallowed by the wind. Caleb's breath tightened. The ridge had begun to break. Emma rose shakily to her feet. "Is someone else out there?" "More than one," Caleb said. "They're coming this way." A loud knock shook the front door. 3 pounding strikes, desperate and uncoordinated. Then another voice, an older man's, cracked with fear. "Please, anyone! Is someone in there?" Caleb pulled the door open against the wind. A blast of frigid air surged inside, momentarily extinguishing the warmth at his back. On the porch stood Mike and his wife, bundled in coats dusted with ice, their teenage boys behind them shivering violently. Mike's beard was coated with frost, and his eyelids fluttered as if he could barely keep them open. "Our furnace went out. We can't get it going. Please," he gasped. "Get inside," Caleb said, clearing the entryway. "Close the door behind you." The family rushed inside, collapsing near the stove. Rocco gave a quick sniff of each of them, then returned to his post beside baby Noah. Emma stepped aside, giving Mike's wife her own blanket without hesitation. "Is he all right?" Mike asked, pointing to the baby. "He will be," Caleb said, "as long as we keep him warm." Mike nodded, overwhelmed, eyes shining with gratitude. But the knocks didn't stop. 3 more thumps rattled the door, this time from the opposite side near the mudroom. Someone must have wandered around the porch searching for another entrance. Rocco barked once, a sharp, commanding warning. Caleb hurried to the mudroom door and cracked it open. A blast of snow whipped inside, and behind it, standing in the swirling white, was a man Caleb recognized instantly. Tom Reynolds, the same man who had mocked him, the same man who had threatened legal action, the same man who refused to believe anything was wrong until the storm swallowed the ridge whole. But he wasn't alone. Cradled in his arms, wrapped in a thin blanket and barely conscious, was his daughter Lily. Her face was ghost pale, her lips quivered blue. Caleb's heart lurched. She just She wouldn't wake up, Tom stammered, voice breaking. I tried the generator. It wouldn't start. My wife's trying to warm her, but... Caleb, please help her. The man who always spoke with authority now shook like a leaf. His eyes, usually hard and sharp, were wide with helpless fear. Caleb stepped aside. Bring her in, now. Tom stumbled over the threshold. His knees nearly buckled as he carried Lily to the stove. Emma slid over, making room for another frail body to absorb the heat. Rocco moved closer, sniffing Lily's face gently, then lay down between the two children, his warmth shared, his watchful eyes flicking from one tiny chest to the other. Tom dropped to his knees. Caleb, I was wrong. About you. About all of this. Caleb didn't say a word. This wasn't the time for apologies. This was the time for survival. He put fresh logs, dry, perfect logs, into the stove. The flames roared brighter, stronger. Behind him, more shapes appeared on the porch. Two elderly neighbors wrapped in scarves. A young couple clutching each other. A man dragging a space heater uselessly behind him. The cord frayed from being yanked through the snow. One by one they came. One by one they begged. And one by one Caleb opened the door. The living room, once quiet and warm, became a haven of cold people thawing back into life. Blankets spread across the floor. Steam from wet jackets rose in gentle clouds. The smell of melting ice, wood smoke, and fear lingered in the air. Through it all, Rocco never left his post beside the children. Caleb moved from family to family, checking fingers, skin temperature, breathing rates. He answered questions, reassured parents, set expectations. The storm howled louder, rattling the shutters like something alive trying to claw inside. But inside the house the fire held, and hope slowly bloomed. Noah whimpered softly, a sign of returning strength. Lily stirred beneath her blankets. Emma exhaled shakily, placing a hand over her heart. Tom reached up, fingertips brushing Caleb's sleeve. Thank you, he whispered, for opening the door, for not turning us away. Caleb looked down at him. I don't turn people away in a storm. Tom nodded, tears forming in his eyes. Outside, the ridge was still drowning in a blizzard, but inside Caleb Hunter's home, something else was happening. A neighborhood that once mocked him was now alive because of him. The storm hadn't ended. The danger hadn't passed. But tonight, two children were breathing again. Tonight, 20 frozen hearts found warmth. And tonight, Pine Hollow Ridge began to realize the man they laughed at might be the only reason they survived the night. By morning, the storm had grown a second pair of teeth. Wind battered the house in violent pulses, shaking loose icicles from the gutters and slamming fistfuls of snow against the siding. The world outside had lost all shape. There was no street, no pine trees, no driveways, only a swirling white void swallowing everything in its path. Inside, Caleb's living room was no longer a living room. It was a shelter, a camp, a lifeboat. 20 people had taken refuge now. Men, women, young couples, retirees bundled in blankets, and 2 children sleeping under Rocco's protective watch. Every inch of floor near the stove was claimed by someone trying to warm their hands, their feet, their hope. Caleb moved between them with calm focus, checking faces for signs of frostbite, handing out mugs of hot broth, tightening blankets around trembling shoulders. He didn't speak much. He didn't need to. People looked at him the way drowning sailors look at a lighthouse. Caleb, do you think the power will come back today? A woman whispered from beneath a quilt. He paused. Not today. The answer fell into the room like another layer of cold. Across the room, Tom Reynolds sat beside Lily, stroking her hair. He looked up at Caleb, guilt heavy in his eyes. They held each other's gaze for a long moment before Tom finally spoke. I told my wife we didn't need backup heat, he murmured. "I told the whole neighborhood you were being dramatic. And now," his voice cracked, "now my house is colder inside than the snow outside." Caleb didn't respond, not out of anger, but because he saw the man wasn't looking for forgiveness. He was looking for a place to put his shame, and there was no room for that now. Before Caleb could say anything more, a rapid pounding shook the front door. Not 3 knocks like the ones from frightened neighbors. Dozens of them. Desperate, panicked, frantic. Rocco leapt to his feet, barking sharply. His bark echoed through the house, slicing through the murmurs and jolting everyone upright. Caleb hurried to the door and cracked it open against the force of the wind. A blast of icy air swept inside, along with a wall of people. 10? 12? More? It was impossible to count in the storm-white chaos. "Please," a man shouted. "We heard you have heat. Please, my wife can't feel her hands. Our pipes burst. Our house is flooding and freezing at the same time. We haven't eaten since last night. Let us in, sir. Please." The cold on their faces looked like it had bitten straight through skin and bone. Eyes watering, teeth chattering, limbs shaking violently, not from fear, but from the kind of cold that silences the heart one beat at a time. Caleb stepped aside. "Come in, all of you." The group stumbled in like survivors from a shipwreck, leaving trails of snow across the entryway. Rocco wove through their legs, sniffing, checking, assessing, his movements purposeful and precise. He nudged at a middle-aged woman's hand, then barked once, sharp. Caleb rushed to her. Her fingers were numb, stiffening, early frostbite. "Sit by the stove," he told her. "Slow warming. Don't rub the skin." More bodies filled the room. The shelter felt smaller, tighter, the air thick with breath and fear. Caleb reached for more blankets, more jars of broth, more anything to keep these people alive. Tom stood and helped distribute cushions from the couch. Someone else fetched candles. Another neighbor cleared space near the wall. The room came alive with movement. Not chaotic, but coordinated. People who barely nodded to one another a week ago now moved like a team. Emma approached Caleb, clutching her now stabilized baby. "What if more people come?" she asked softly. Caleb looked around at the packed room, faces huddled close to the stove, bodies shivering beneath layers of blankets. His living room felt like the inside of a snow cave, illuminated only by firelight. "We make room," he said simply. Another knock pounded the door, but this one felt different, slower, heavier. Caleb opened the door to find an elderly man, bundled in a parka far too thin for weather this brutal. Behind him stood his wife, leaning heavily on a cane. Their eyes were hollow with cold. "I'm sorry," the old man whispered. "We didn't want to bother anyone, but our car won't start, and our house is like ice." Caleb gently took the woman's arm. "You're not bothering anyone. Come inside." Rocco brushed against the old man's leg, warming him with his fur. The man gave a trembling smile. "Well, aren't you a handsome boy?" he whispered, voice cracking. The dog licked his hand. Inside, conversations quieted as the couple entered. People shifted, making space without being asked. The elderly woman was guided toward the warm center, wrapped in a spare quilt, and given a mug to hold. Caleb watched the scene unfold. A community once divided by pettiness and gossip, now united by simple human need. The storm screamed outside. The fire answered with a defiant roar, and for the first time since the sky turned white, Caleb allowed himself a sliver of hope. But hope was fragile, especially in storms like this. As Caleb turned back toward the window, his breath caught. 2 more figures were visible through the snow, a man dragging someone over his shoulder. Was that? He grabbed his coat, swinging the door open. Wind blasted his face. The man staggered forward. It was Mark Holloway, the high school chemistry teacher. In his arms was his teenage son, limp, eyes barely open. "He collapsed," Mark croaked. "Couldn't breathe in the cold. Please, bring him in," Caleb said, voice firm, steady. Mark pushed inside as Caleb boosted the boy's weight. Rocco barked, frantic, urgent. This bark was different. Caleb froze. Rocco only barked like that when a life was seconds from slipping. "Everyone clear space," Caleb ordered. People scrambled, moving blankets, shifting positions, making room for the boy. Caleb laid the teen near the stove, checking his pulse. Weak. He wrapped the boy in a wool blanket and guided the father's trembling hands to hold the boy's face close to the heat. "You keep talking to him," Caleb said. "Don't let him fade." Mark nodded, tears freezing on his cheeks. Across the room, Emma held Noah tighter. Tom clutched Lily as if afraid to blink. The elderly couple whispered prayers under trembling breaths. The house felt like the inside of a beating heart. People warming. People surviving. People realizing they owed their lives to the man they once mocked. In the corner, Rocco lay down, exhausted but alert, eyes scanning every person he had sworn to protect. The storm slammed against the walls, angry and relentless, but the shelter within was stronger. Caleb stood at the center of it all, the firelight flashing across his face like distant lightning. He looked around the room, at every pair of desperate, hopeful eyes, and felt something deep inside shift. He wasn't alone anymore. Not in the fight. Not in the memory. Not in the purpose. Tonight, his home had become the spine of Pine Hollow Ridge, but the storm was far from finished, and danger, in its most unpredictable form, was still making its way toward them. Night fell like a curtain of iron. The wind outside shifted from a roar to a violent scream, a sound so sharp it seemed to cut through the walls. Snow blasted sideways, forming drifts against Caleb's house that rose higher by the hour. The porch lights, powered by a small backup battery, glowed faintly through the storm, but everything beyond the yard was swallowed in white. Inside, the shelter of warmth held steady. 20 people were huddled around the glowing stove, wrapped in blankets and breathing the same shaky relief of those who had narrowly escaped something larger than themselves. Rocco stayed curled near the two children, checking them with gentle nudges every few minutes. Caleb moved through the room again, counting heads, checking pulses where needed, listening for any changes in breathing. It was second nature to him. Years of triage, years of emergencies, years of doing what no one else could or would. But even as he worked, something prickled at the back of his mind. A subtle shift in the storm's rhythm. A faint tremor through the floorboards. A silence layered beneath the noise. And then, Rocco's head snapped up. His ears shot forward. His muscles tightened. A low growl vibrated in his chest. Not fear. Warning. Caleb froze. Every instinct he'd ever trained roaring to life. "What is it, boy?" he whispered. Rocco moved toward the front of the house, each step precise, controlled. His growl deepened. People noticed. Conversations tapered off. The elderly couple looked toward the door anxiously. Tom stood slowly, pulling his daughter closer. "What's wrong with him?" someone asked. Caleb didn't answer. He was already stepping toward the window. He wiped the frost away with his sleeve and leaned in close. At first, all he saw was snow. Then, headlights. 2 beams cutting through the blizzard in a slow, deliberate crawl. A truck. A lifted black pickup. Tires wrapped in chains. Engine grumbling beneath the storm like a sleeping beast. It fought its way up Maple Ridge Road, weaving past abandoned cars buried in drifts. It didn't belong to anyone in Pine Hollow, and it wasn't lost. It was hunting. Caleb's pulse sharpened. The truck stopped at the end of his driveway. The headlights glared against the snow, turning flakes into furious sparks. The engine idled loudly, too loudly for the quiet desperation that had filled the ridge all night. Who is that?" Emma whispered, clutching Noah. I don't know, Caleb said softly, but they're not here looking for shelter. 3 doors opened. 3 figures climbed out. Heavy coats, masks covering their faces, gloved hands gripping metal tools, crowbars, long-handled scrapers. A ripple of fear swept through the room. Tom swallowed hard. Caleb, do you know them? No. Then what do they want? Caleb looked at the stove, at the glowing fire, at the only chimney on the entire street still sending up smoke, the only lifeline in Pine Hollow. They want what everyone wants, Caleb said. Warmth. But they could just knock, Emma said. He shook his head slowly. Not men like this. The figures advanced toward the house. Their movements weren't frantic, like neighbors seeking help. They were steady, purposeful, predatory. Caleb turned from the window. Everyone quiet. Stay away from the doors. Stay in the center of the room. Fear fluttered through the group. Blankets rustled. Someone gasped. The elderly woman clutched her husband's arm. Rocco growled louder, stepping between the families and the front of the house, body tense like a drawn bowstring. Caleb crossed to the hall closet and opened it. He reached up and pulled down a long, zippered case. The sound of the zipper echoed through the living room like thunder. Inside was his 12-gauge shotgun, not loaded, never loaded indoors, but clean, maintained, and ready. He snapped it open, loaded 2 shells, then snapped it closed with a firm, practiced motion. Caleb, Tom whispered, eyes wide. Are you serious? You're not going out there. I'm not going out, Caleb said, but they aren't getting in. A loud metallic bang struck the front door. Everyone jumped. Another bang, then another. Not knocks, blows, tools hitting wood. Someone yelped in fear. The teenage boy who'd arrived earlier pulled his knees to his chest. Emma covered Noah's ears. Caleb stood firm, shotgun lowered, but ready. His voice dropped into the tone he used during missions overseas. Quiet, steady, absolute. No one comes through that door. The men outside shouted to each other, their voices distorted by masks and wind. Get the window! Break it! Hurry! I can't see! Hit it harder! Caleb stepped toward the front window just as a crowbar slammed into it from outside. A piercing thud shook the glass. People screamed, but the window didn't break. Another strike, harder this time. The crowbar bounced off the reinforced polycarbonate pane with a hollow thump. What the? A voice outside yelled. Why won't it break? Caleb allowed himself one breath of relief. They won't get in that way. But the men shifted tactics. They're going to the back, Rocco barked suddenly, racing toward the kitchen. Caleb followed, heart pounding. He heard the footsteps, crunching through the snow, circling the house faster than the wind could swallow the sound. Then, a slam against the back door. Then another. One more. Caleb, Tom shouted from the living room. They're trying every entrance. I see them, Caleb shouted back. The back door shuddered violently. The lock rattled. Rocco growled, teeth bared, placing his body between Caleb and the door off like a shield. Caleb raised the shotgun, not aiming yet, but ready if the door gave. Ease up, one of the men yelled outside. Try the hatch, the shelter hatch. Caleb's blood went cold. The shelter hatch. If they found it, if they pried it open, the entire group hiding below could be exposed, trapped, helpless. Rocco lunged toward the mudroom window, barking like a creature possessed. Caleb, Tom yelled again. They're heading for the hatch. Caleb didn't hesitate. Tom, stay with the kids. Emma, keep everyone away from the windows. He yanked open the basement door, sprinted down the stairs, and grabbed the second flashlight and emergency crowbar he kept there. Rocco bounded after him, feet scrambling on the steps. At the bottom, Caleb shoved open the back cellar door that led into the yard. Snow blasted into his face like shards. He pulled up his hood, tightened his gloves, and pushed forward. The wind screamed so loudly he could barely hear his own breath. But he could hear the men, clanging, scraping, grunting, trying to pry open the steel hatch of his shelter. Rocco growled, ready to leap. Caleb raised the shotgun and shouted into the blizzard, his voice cutting through the storm. "Step away from that hatch!" The men froze. A moment of eerie silence followed. Then the leader turned toward the sound of Caleb's voice, his mask coated in frost, eyes narrowed. "You got heat!" the man shouted. "You got supplies! We're freezing out here! Let us in!" "This isn't how you ask," Caleb said. "We're not asking," another man barked. "Move aside!" Rocco took a step forward, bark sharp and fearless. "Call off your dog," the leader yelled. "He's not the one you should be worried about," Caleb replied. The wind twisted between them, flinging snow in violent spirals. The men exchanged glances, cold, hard, hungry. Then one of them lunged toward Caleb. In a single motion, Caleb lifted the shotgun skyward and fired. The blast thundered through the storm like lightning cracking open the sky. The men staggered back, shouting, "Are you crazy? He's armed! Fall back! Fall back!" They scrambled toward their truck, slipping on ice, stumbling into each other. The engine growled, tires spinning wildly before catching traction. The truck fishtailed down the road and vanished into the white void. Silence returned. But not a peaceful silence. A heavy, trembling silence. The kind that settles after danger retreats, but not far enough. Caleb lowered the shotgun. His breath came in shaky clouds. Rocco pressed against his leg, whining softly, not out of fear, but out of worry for Caleb. "Good boy," Caleb whispered, placing a hand on his fur. "You kept everyone safe." Together, man and dog stared into the storm where the truck had disappeared. The danger was gone. For now. But Caleb knew storms didn't just bring cold. Storms brought chaos, desperation, loss of reason. And this storm? It was just getting started. He turned back toward the house, toward the people waiting inside, toward the warmth flickering against the cold, toward the next battle he wasn't sure he could see coming yet. Rocco stayed glued to his heel, and together, they stepped back into the fragile sanctuary. Because the night wasn't over, and survival had just become a far more complicated thing. By the time Caleb and Rocco made it back inside, the warmth of the stove felt like a miracle against the ice chewing at their coats. 20 pairs of frightened eyes lifted toward them as the door shut behind the two. Emma held Noah tightly, whispering something soft into his tiny ear. Tom stood near the window, jaw clenched, staring at the white void outside as if expecting the masked men to return at any moment. Others huddled close together, listening, breathing, waiting. Caleb wiped melting snow from his gloves. "They're gone," he said quietly. "For now." The room exhaled in collective relief. But Rocco didn't settle, not this time. He paced, sniffing the air, ears twitching. A low whine trembled in his throat. Caleb frowned. "Easy, boy." Rocco ignored him, nose lifting higher, sniffing again and again. Something in the air bothered him, something invisible, something moving the wrong way. Caleb took a breath and stopped. The air felt thicker. He inhaled again, slow, testing. Not cold, not smoke. Something flat. Something warm in the wrong way. His stomach tightened. In the corner of the room, the fire flickered in a sluggish pattern, the flames drooping instead of rising. The smoke in the stovepipe swirled strangely, as if fighting the draft instead of flowing upward. Then, a tiny, sharp chirp echoed from the hallway. Beep. People turned their heads. Beep, beep, beep. It was the carbon monoxide alarm. Caleb dropped to a knee, heart slamming into his ribs. "Everyone stay low," he ordered. "Don't stand, don't breathe deep, stay down." Fear swept through the room like another gust of wind. "What's wrong? What's happening?" Emma cried. Caleb checked the stove again. The vent wasn't pulling air out. It was pushing air in, a reverse draft. The storm outside had changed pressure so violently that the chimney couldn't breathe. If the stove couldn't breathe, neither could they. He grabbed the thermometer mounted beside the stove, one specifically for airflow shifts. The needle was barely moving. Rocco barked at the back door, scratching wildly. "He knows," Caleb muttered. "The intake vent. Something's blocking it." Tom staggered to his feet. "What do you mean blocking it?" "Snowdrift," Caleb said. "A big one. If the vent doesn't pull cold air in, the fire pulls air from the room. It'll suck the oxygen right out of this house." Someone gasped. Another person started coughing. Rocco barked again, sharper, frantic, demanding. Caleb's head swam for a moment. His vision shimmered at the edges. CO rising, oxygen falling. "Everyone down," Caleb repeated. "Slow breaths, slow." Tom crawled toward him. "What do we do?" "I need to get outside," Caleb replied, coughing now. "Clear the intake." "In that storm? You barely made it back before." "We don't have a choice." Rocco barked again, pawing at the back door like a creature possessed. Caleb pushed himself up, dizzy but determined. But before he reached the door, his knees buckled. Rocco lunged forward, pressing his body against Caleb's side to keep him upright. The dog's warmth steadied him just enough for Caleb to grab the doorknob. Tom grabbed Caleb's arm. "You can't go out there. You won't make it 10 feet. Caleb turned to him, breath shallow. "Then you go." Tom froze. "Me?" "You're breathing easier than I am," Caleb forced out. "You grew up in this weather. You know how snow drifts form. You know where the vent is. And you—" his voice thinned. "You owe this neighborhood a whole lot more than rules and fines." Tom stared at him, stunned. Rocco barked once, the loudest, sharpest bark yet, and shoved his muzzle against the door again. Tom looked at the dog, then at the terrified families, then at his daughter Lily lying beside Noah. Her breaths were thin, too thin. He closed his eyes. "I'll go." Caleb grabbed his coat from the hook, shoved it at Tom, and pointed to the back of the house. "Blue cap, not red. Blue. Clear the intake. Dig it out until you hear a pull, like a big inhale." Tom nodded, pulling on the coat with shaking hands. Someone called out, "Please, hurry!" Tom didn't answer. Caleb pushed Rocco back gently. "Stay. Guard them." It should have been Caleb out there. He knew it. Rocco knew it. But Caleb couldn't walk straight now. The CO creeping into his bloodstream tugged at his consciousness like a distant tide. Tom braced himself, grabbed a snow shovel near the mudroom, and pulled open the back door. The storm slammed into him with a force that folded him in half. "Go!" Caleb yelled before collapsing to his knees. Rocco whined, circling Caleb, nudging his head with desperate insistence. Inside the shelter room, Emma began crying, clutching Noah. Someone else started to panic. Voices rose, mixing with shallow, frightened breaths. Caleb forced himself upright enough to shout, "Stay low. Keep breathing slow. Don't panic." The room dimmed around him. Time slipped strangely. Outside, Tom disappeared into the white swirl, the storm swallowing him whole as he fought his way around the house. Minutes dragged. The fire dimmed further. Rocco whined, pushing his body against Caleb's chest to keep him conscious. Another chirp from the detector. "Beep, beep, beep, fast now. Warning." Someone sobbed. Someone prayed. Caleb shut his eyes. Then, a sound. A muffled shout from outside. Followed by a rush. A sudden whoosh in the chimney pipe. A pull of air so strong the stove roared back to life. The fire snapped upright. The flames surged tall and hot, devouring the oxygen flowing in through the cleared vent. Fresh air rushed into the room, sweeping away the heaviness. The CO alarm chirped once more and went silent. Breathing in, the room deepened. The fog lifted. Color returned. Emma gasped, clutching her baby tighter as tears spilled from her eyes. "He did it," someone whispered. "Tom did it." Caleb sucked in a shaky lungful of real air. He felt life flow back into his limbs. But Rocco whined louder now, pawing at the back door. Something was wrong. Caleb forced himself to his feet, leaning heavily on the wall. He staggered toward the mudroom. "Open it," he whispered. Two neighbors helped pull the door wide. Snow blasted in, and there, Tom lay half buried in the drift, face pale, body trembling violently, shovel still in hand. His breath came in broken, freezing gasps, and beside him, Rocco, trying to dig him free, pushing snow off his chest, whining and barking for help, his paws red from the cold, his body shaking from the effort. Caleb rushed forward with the others, pulling Tom inside and dragging Rocco after him. Tom collapsed on the floor, coughing. Did it work?" Caleb knelt beside him, gripping his shoulder. "You saved everyone in this house." Tom's eyes filled with tears, half from cold, half from something deeper. "Rocco saved me," he whispered. "He wouldn't leave. He kept digging." Caleb looked at the dog. Rocco's tail thumped weakly, eyes half closed, legs trembling. He had pushed himself past exhaustion, past safety, to protect a man who once threatened to ruin Caleb's life. Caleb pulled Rocco into his arms. "You brave, stubborn boy," he whispered. "You saved him. You saved all of us." Around them, neighbors cried, hugged each other, pressed hands over their mouths in disbelief. The storm still howled. The night was still long. The danger was far from over. But for the second time in 24 hours, life had been pulled back from the edge. Not by warmth, not by shelter, but by a loyal dog who refused to let anyone die on his watch. And Pine Hollow Ridge would never forget this night. By the time the storm finally loosened its grip, the world outside had transformed into something unrecognizable, an endless white ocean frozen mid-wave. Snowdrifts climbed halfway up windows. Trees bowed under the weight of ice. The mountains that usually stood proud beyond the ridge now blended into the pale horizon like ghosts. Inside Caleb Hunter's home, 20 people slept in a scattered patchwork of blankets and borrowed coats. Some slept sitting up, some curled beside loved ones, some with hands still linked even in their dreams. The fire had burned low, pulsing softly like a tired heartbeat. Rocco lay near the stove, his paws tucked under his chest, breathing slow and shallow after the long night. His fur was still damp from the snow. His ears twitched occasionally at the faint sounds outside. But he slept. He had earned it. Caleb sat beside him on the floor, back against the couch, eyes heavy, body aching in every possible way. Exhaustion dragged at him like chains, but he refused to sleep, not until he'd checked every corner of the house twice, not until every person under his roof drew breath with a little more ease. In the quiet, he listened. Not for danger this time, but for something he had almost forgotten. Silence. Not the dead silence of the power outage, not the terrifying quiet of suffocating air. A gentler silence. The kind that meant the wind had finally stopped screaming. The storm was over. Caleb let out a long exhale, one he'd held unconsciously for hours, maybe days. From across the room, Tom Reynolds stirred. Wrapped in a blanket, leaning against the wall, He blinked groggily and rubbed frost-burned hands together. His first words came out rough. Is it morning?" Caleb nodded. "Best I can tell." Tom swallowed hard, looking at the families sleeping around them. "We made it." "You did more than that," Caleb replied. Tom's eyes lowered, not in shame this time, but in something closer to humility. "I just cleared a pipe." "You saved 20 people," Caleb corrected him gently. "There's no just about it." Tom nodded once, eyes reddening. "And your dog?" "Rocco wouldn't let me fall asleep. He kept shoving me, barking in my face." He gave a shaky laugh. "Didn't think I'd ever be grateful for a dog breathing hot air on me in a blizzard." Caleb looked down at Rocco, who lifted his head just enough to thump his tail once against the floor. "He's always been stubborn," Caleb said softly. "Saved my hide more times than I can count." Tom studied him for a long moment. "Caleb, I'm sorry. For everything. The fines. The board meetings. All the ways I treated you. I thought you were unhinged. Obsessed." Caleb kept his eyes on the fire. "Sometimes preparation looks like obsession to people who've never been cold enough to fear it." Tom nodded slowly. "Well, I fear it now." Footsteps padded softly on the wooden floor. Emma emerged from the corner where she'd been sleeping beside Noah. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but her face glowed with relief as she looked at her child, warm, breathing, safe. "Caleb," she said quietly, "I don't know how to thank you. If you hadn't opened your door—" "You don't need to," he interrupted gently. "You did what any mother would. You fought your way here." "No," she insisted, voice trembling. "I wouldn't have made it without you. Without this place, without him." She knelt and ran her fingers through Rocco's fur. "He saved Noah before he even reached your doorstep." Rocco nuzzled her hand, tired but still listening. Others began waking, one by one. Murmurs filled the room. Soft voices, disbelief, gratitude. Stories of how cold their homes had grown, how close they were to giving up. Children yawned, wrapped in coats too big for them. Elderly neighbors took slow breaths, touching Caleb's arm as they passed, like they needed to make sure he was real. Then someone gasped. The overhead lights flickered. Once, twice, then steadied into a warm, humming glow. The room erupted. "The power's back! Oh my Lord, thank God! The heat'll come on! We're saved!" People hugged each other, cried openly, some sinking to their knees in relief. The hum of electricity felt like a choir returning after a long silence. Caleb didn't cheer. He watched the bright light wash over the room like a strange, artificial sunrise, and felt something almost bittersweet. The storm had changed them. It had stripped away fences, pride, grudges. For a few days, Pine Hollow Ridge became something rare. A community. Now the world was rushing back. Voices grew louder as families bundled themselves, preparing to leave. Some hesitated at the door, uncertain whether stepping outside was safe. Caleb nodded each time. "Slow and steady. Roads are still dangerous." Tom moved slowly toward the entryway, helping folks one by one, his frostbitten hands wrapped in fresh bandages that Emma had applied while whispering prayers under her breath. Emma was the last to pack up. She wrapped Noah securely and paused at the door, looking at Caleb. "You didn't just save our lives," she said. "You gave us hope. You reminded us what people should be to each other." Caleb lowered his gaze. "That wasn't me. That was all of us." Her eyes drifted to Rocco. "No," she said softly. "It was him, too." She kissed Rocco's head and stepped outside into the blinding white return of daylight. Finally, the house emptied until only 3 souls remained: Caleb, Tom, Rocco. Tom lingered awkwardly. He shifted his weight, then looked toward the fire. "I'm not going home just yet," he said quietly. "Not until my daughter warms up a bit more. They're next door, close enough to hear if they need me." Caleb nodded. Tom hesitated again. "Listen, one day, when all this melts, the board's gonna meet, and I'm going to tell them everything. How wrong I was. How wrong we all were." Caleb didn't respond. Tom stepped closer, his voice low and honest. "You saved my family, Caleb, and your dog saved me. There's nothing I can ever do to repay that. But I'll start by making sure. Pine Hollow Ridge never mocks you again." A long moment passed between them, a silent truce born from cold, fear, and survival. Then the quiet was broken by a faint, distant rumble, the sound of engines. Not the looter's truck, not aggressive, not predatory. This was different. A rhythmic churn, a scrape of steel, a rising mechanical growl. Caleb stepped to the window. 3 enormous plow trucks crawled up the ridge, cutting through the frozen wasteland with steady, practiced force. Behind them rolled utility trucks with flashing amber lights. Crews bundled in orange jackets moved carefully along the road, checking lines, clearing debris, restoring life to the mountain. Neighbors stepped out of their homes, shielding their eyes against the bright sky, staring in awe as rescue finally arrived. Tom exhaled, shoulders sagging with relief. "We made it," he whispered. "We really made it." Caleb watched the plows move closer, carving a path that glittered under the morning sun. He rested a hand on Rocco's back. The dog shifted, leaning into the touch. "We did," Caleb murmured. But inside him, deeper than exhaustion, deeper than relief, something else stirred. Pride, grief, healing, and a whisper of something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. Belonging. Outside, Pine Hollow Ridge woke up to a brand new world. One shaped not by rules or appearances, but by the courage of a veteran and the loyalty of a dog who would die before letting harm reach his people. The storm had revealed who they all were, and who they could be. In the hush that followed the plows, in the sunlight glinting off ice, Caleb closed his eyes and breathed deep. For the first time in years, the air didn't hurt. It healed. By the time the sun climbed fully over Pine Hollow Ridge, its pale yellow light spread across the frozen valley like a gentle hand. Roofs glittered beneath crystalline frost. Tree branches sparkled as if dipped in sugar. The world looked softer now, still cold, still dangerous, but softened, humbled. Caleb Hunter stepped outside for the first time since the night the storm broke open. Snow crunched under his boots. The cold nipped sharply at his beard, but it no longer carried the menace it once did. Rocco limped beside him, his back leg wrapped in a bandage Emma had helped apply. Every few steps, the dog paused to sniff the air, then pressed against Caleb's leg, as if making sure his human was still beside him. Together, they walked to the small rise in the center of the yard, the hill of snow beneath which the shelter rested. The steel hatch lay half-buried, steam curling from its edges where warm air met freezing morning. Caleb rested his gloved hand on the mound and whispered, almost to himself, "We did it, buddy." Rocco breathed out a soft chuff, tail tapping weakly against Caleb's boot. A door slammed across the street. Caleb looked up to see Tom Reynolds trudging out of his house, bundled in a heavy coat, Lily perched on his hip. She waved excitedly when she saw Caleb and Rocco. "Hi, Mr. Caleb," she called, her cheeks rosy. Caleb lifted a hand and waved back. Tom approached, shifting Lily to his other arm. "We're heading to the community center. Emergency meeting. They want you there." Caleb shook his head. "I'm not one for meetings." Tom smiled, not with arrogance this time, but something closer to friendship. "Well, too bad. This one's about you." Before Caleb could respond, A convoy of trucks rolled past, utility crews waving, slowing as they passed his driveway. One man tapped a gloved hand to his helmet in a salute before moving on. Caleb cleared his throat. "Give me 10 minutes. I'll be there." Tom beamed. "Good. Pine Hollow needs to hear what you have to say." Inside, Caleb changed into a clean flannel, boots still damp but warming. Rocco curled at his feet, watching him with those warm amber eyes that had seen too much, survived too much, and still trusted too deeply. "Think they'll let us sit in the back?" Caleb asked. Rocco thumped his tail. Together, they stepped into the snow. The Pine Hollow Community Center buzzed with voices. People filled every folding chair, others standing along the walls. The storm had carved something into them. Lines of fear, exhaustion, gratitude. And when Caleb walked in, heads turned. Conversations hushed. A slow ripple of applause spread through the room. Caleb froze. Attention had never been his friend. Not in the army. Not afterward. He felt Rocco press gently against his leg. Tom stood at the front, tapped the microphone, and the room settled. "Everyone," Tom began, voice steady but emotional, "we came here today because our community changed this week. We were tested, hard, and we survived because of one man and one dog." He nodded toward Caleb. Caleb shifted uncomfortably as more applause rose. Louder this time, fuller. Tom continued, "And because of that, the board has drafted an amendment. Effective immediately, we're removing restrictions on subterranean shelters, off-grid heat sources, and winter emergency installations." Cheers erupted. Caleb blinked, stunned. Tom raised a hand signaling for calm. "Furthermore, we'd like to establish a new committee, the Pine Hollow Emergency Preparedness Council, and we want Caleb Hunter as our advisor." Caleb took a breath. He saw Emma holding Noah in the back row, tears shining in her eyes. He saw Mike and Brenda, the elderly couple he had carried blankets to, children waving, fathers nodding in respect. Tom looking at him with gratitude instead of defiance. He placed a hand on Rocco's head. "I appreciate it," Caleb said finally, voice low but carrying. "But I didn't do any of this alone." He knelt beside the dog, scratching behind his ears. This guy was the real hero. The room erupted again, this time for Rocco. Children rushed forward to pet him. Rocco accepted their affection with quiet dignity, lifting his head proudly. Lily wrapped her arms around his neck, whispering something into his fur. His tail wagged gently, warming the cold wooden floors of the hall. When the meeting ended, people lingered, shaking Caleb's hand, asking questions about future storms, about how they could prepare better, about what materials to buy, what tools to keep. He answered every question patiently. He had spent years feeling like a ghost among them, always present, never seen. Now, the community that once mocked him treated him like the weathered pillar he'd always been. Hours later, he and Rocco walked home under a sky turning the color of molten copper. The storm's remnants glittered like diamonds across the ridge. Children sledded down small hills, their laughter carrying across the snow. On his porch, Caleb stopped. He looked out at the mountains, those great silent friends who'd watched every mistake, every victory, every moment of his life in Pine Hollow Ridge. Rocco nudged his hand. They stood there a long time, breathing in the cold that no longer frightened them. Caleb finally spoke, soft and sure. "This time," he murmured, almost to the wind, almost to the memory of Lewis, "we were ready." Rocco placed his head against Caleb's palm, warm and loyal and alive, and beneath their feet, the shelter that once drew ridicule lay still and steady, a heartbeat under the earth, waiting for the next time the world forgot its own fragility. For now, though, Pine Hollow Ridge was safe, families were warm, and the man they mocked, the dog they underestimated, were the quiet guardians of a town forever changed. The fire they once laughed at had saved them all, and it would burn, steady, loyal, unyielding, for every winter still to come. If you made it to the end of this story, I'd love to know you were here. Just drop a simple 1 in the comments, nothing fancy. It helps this channel more than you think, and it lets me know you want more stories like this. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We've got more powerful, emotional, heart-pounding tales coming. Stories of survival, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between a veteran and his dog. Comment 1 to show you're part of the journey, and I'll see you in the next story.